More evidence today of the cost of standing up to the Chinese dictatorship. China's punishment for our big mouth has been to virtually stop all imports of Australian wine completely. And China's foreign ministry spokesman yesterday underlined it. He said, we got to shut up, basically. He complained about the head of our Home Affairs Department, Mike Pizzullo, the man we just were talking about, telling staff at Anzac Day the drums of war were beating and we should prepare for war. Pizzullo didn't even mention China. But China knew that slipper fit. And that foreign affairs spokesman hit back, saying some individual politicians, well, Pizzullo's not a politician, are keen to make statements that incite confrontation and hype up the threat of war, which is extremely irresponsible. Well, speaking of Mr. Spokesman, exactly which individuals are irresponsibly hyping up the threat of war? How about your own president, your dictator Xi Jinping, ordering his military last year to be ready for war at any second, and saying it again just last January? And was it China's official newspaper? What about that? Gloating how the US would lose a war with China over Taiwan, that island democracy that China wants to take over very soon. And how about China's Taiwan Affairs Office warning that the signal given by military drills, that's China now sending warplanes almost every day to test Taiwan's air defences, is that we are determined to stop Taiwan independence and to stop Taiwan from working with the US. We do not promise to abandon the use of force. So, if you want reckless war talk, irresponsible war talk, it is all coming from China. And Taiwan's foreign minister yesterday said it seemed China was preparing for its final assault on his country. Well, US President Joe Biden today mentioned this in his speech to Congress to mark his first 100 days as president. And he made clear that China's dictator was actually very, very serious, and that he also thought the democracies of the West were actually weak for all the talk about defending our interests and our values.
In my discussion with President Xi, I told him, we welcome the competition. We're not looking for conflict. But I made absolutely clear that we will defend America's interest across the board. America will stand up to unfair trade practices that undercut American workers and American industries, like subsidies from state to state-owned operations and enterprises, and the theft of American technology and intellectual property. I also told President Xi that we'll maintain a strong military presence in the Indo-Pacific, just as we do with NATO and Europe, not to start a conflict, but to prevent one. I spent a lot of time with President Xi. Traveled over 17,000 miles with him. Spent, they tell me, over 24 hours in private discussions with him. When he called to congratulate him, we had a 2-hour discussion. He's deadly earnest about becoming the most significant, consequential nation in the world. He and others, autocrats, think that democracy can't compete.
Given that, it's not a great time for America to have a president who looks and sounds rather frail and rather weak. But let's now look at Biden, 100-day president. Am I being unfair to him? He is more popular than Donald Trump was after 100 days, but still more unpopular than any president before him since polling started in 1945. And I wasn't impressed by his speech to Congress today, grotesquely exaggerating that protest in January by dozens of ragtag Trump supporters who broke into the US Capitol building. Biden made this unruly protest that went nowhere, protesters who killed nobody, made that sound like a tremendous civil war.
Extraordinary courage was summoned. The insurrection was an existential crisis, a test of whether our democracy could survive.
Good God, if a few clueless protesters in January were an existential threat to the US democracy, how will America ever survive a threat like China? Joining me is Barbara Heineback, who worked for both the Carter and Clinton Democrat administrations. Barbara, always good to catch up with you. What did you make of Biden's speech today, or his first 100 days generally?
Yeah, something that should have happened in February. They finally trotted him out now in April, and it was just to a room that had a couple of hundred people instead of 1,000. So they were very carefully orchestrating everything and making sure that they could maintain some control. It was in the U.S. Capitol. I don't know where the worry was, actually. And like you say, there were so many exaggerations and hyperbole without any substance or idea as to where are we going in regards to defense. What we do know by the stroke of a pen, he has already killed the pipeline, the Alaskan pipeline, with our oil. So if the oil doesn't come to us, where's it going to go? To China? And then all of this, the beginning of his speech was just really going on about the wonderful mothers that have to suffer so. And he didn't hit any points in terms of what are we going to do about health. I could not believe the man would speak and just go on for an hour, 7 minutes, and not say one thing about the problem and the crisis at the southern border. He spent a lot of his time talking about COVID, and then when he sort of flipped into the race card business and youngsters in school, once again, I think he was trying to clean up previous statements he's made about people of color, but he dug himself in even deeper, making it sound like not only should Blacks have an opportunity of education, but they're actually capable of learning. Has he never seen the movie Hidden Figures, where we had 3 women mathematicians who helped out with NASA and everything? It was embarrassing. It was pathetic to hear an American president apologize for America, and it really showed that someone is pulling the strings. We're just not quite sure who, but looking at Nancy and Kamala behind him, it reminded me of those cars, those automobiles, a little doll in the 1950s, and in the back of the car, the head would go like this because they were just, yeah, nodding favorably toward everything. At least Nancy didn't tear up his speech.
That's true too. Barbara, let me just pick up something you just said there, where you don't get the idea that he's actually in charge of his own agenda. There are reports that he does fewer than one public event, or, sort of in front of the TV cameras at least, event a day. He campaigned during the election campaign. He campaigned like a moderate, but now is ruling like a radical. I mean, promising a nearly $2 trillion COVID relief package, another $2 trillion plus for infrastructure, $1.5 trillion on other things. Meanwhile, promising cuts in carbon dioxide emissions 3 times bigger than before. I mean,
3 times.
Barbara, what's going on?
Where is $6 trillion going to come from? And in addition, he's thrown everything into the infrastructure. And what he seems to be attempting to do now is every time he puts something forward, well, it's only been a couple of times, he tries to throw the whole house into the package to go big. And it doesn't make sense. And then he's talking about schools and letting the youngsters begin school when they're 3 years old. Excuse me? Isn't it a parent's job to take care of nourishing your child until they're of school age? And he wants the first 2 years of college to be free. America doesn't have the money for this sort of thing. And plus, if a young man, a young woman wants to make something of their lives, they have to get out there and do the part-time jobs. You can't expect to stay under mommy and daddy's pocket.
This sort of stuff we've seen it here tends to be middle-class welfare rather than going to where it really is needed. Barbara Heineback, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much. Take care, Andrew.